partnering with Minderoo on such an important initiative. We see that this is the start of a long and collaborative partnership to ensure every child has the opportunity to thrive by 5. We believe that early childhood education is a necessary investment in the future of this great country. We know that it generates a consequential high return on investment. Research can have great impact when it's connected with practice and innovation, but we continually need to review the way that we do it so that we can enhance forever its effectiveness. Monash has world-leading capabilities in early childhood education, children's cognitive and brain development, and policy reform and better governance. And today's event is an important step in developing the relationship between Monash and Minderoo to show an alignment of our key values and how Monash is, we think, uniquely positioned to provide innovative research that is truly evidence-based and deeply connected to practice in order to enhance the outcomes of our kids under 5. Our researchers are already doing some remarkable things in the early childhood education space. Not only is Monash a top research university, but we partner with the community to turn this research into impact. And that's always the purpose of research, not for the sake of knowledge itself, but to make it work for all of us. We have a strong focus to improve a person's attention, focus and self-control throughout life, like in the work being done by Professor Kim Cornish on cognitive resilience and the impact that this can make when viewed as a gateway to mental health, as well as the development of a digital adaptive toolbox for different communities. Professor Cornish is director of the Turner Institute for Brain and Mental Health, the head of the School of Psychological Sciences at Monash University, and a Sir John Monash Distinguished Professor. She'll be discussing her research in a moment. We enable and empower our community to ensure all Australians have the best start in life, as we see through Monash Laureate Professor Marilyn Fleer's Conceptual Play Lab. This is Australia's first programmatic study of children's STEM concept development in the early years through intentional teaching in play-based setting and designed collaboratively with communities and families. And finally, we aim for our evidence-based research to inform policy and practice to create real change, which our Better Governance and Policy Director, Professor Michael Mintram, focuses on as he and his team advance the design and practice of governance and policy in Australia and the Asia Pacific region generally. And we're fortunate today to have Professors Cornish, Fleer and Mintram with us for our panel session. They'll be leading a robust and I hope very honest discussion on the importance of high quality early childhood education in promoting brain and social development, and how frontier research, deeply connected into practice and technology, can positively affect systems change. So I extend my thanks to our panelists in advance for offering their time and expertise for today's event. Investing in early childhood development makes social and economic sense. We're investing for the future by investing in our future generations. But finally, and I think incredibly importantly, so as to provide serious scale and impetus to this initiative, philanthropy, the social sector, if you like, its support is needed and enormously welcomed. And I take great pleasure today in acknowledging Nicola Forrest, co-founder and co-chair of Minderoo Foundation, on her truly remarkable work, commitment and leadership in this area. We look forward to Nicola's address as well shortly. So I'm now pleased to introduce today's facilitator, Professor Rod Glover, Professor of Policy and Impact at the Monash Sustainable Development Institute. Professor Glover specialises in large-scale innovation at the levels of systems and societies. That reminds me, Rod, that you're a bit like Big Brother looking at us. But Professor Glover, it's over to you. Please welcome Professor Glover. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chancellor, and thank you for your support for not only today's event, but also the larger cause. Hello, everyone. I'm Rod Glover, and I'll be your facilitator this afternoon. I'm coming from my hometown of Frankston, home of Monash Peninsula, and on the lands of the Bunurong people. I'm a Professor of Policy and Impact in a Sustainable Development Institute, and you might be wondering how early childhood development links to sustainable development. But the definition of sustainable development is actually that we leave to the next generation a set of capital stocks and life opportunities greater than those enjoyed by our own. And in that sustainable development frame, as in my broader world of public policy, our holy grail is to really identify win-win opportunities where we can identify options for society that produce benefits today, but also tomorrow, where they benefit children, but also families and communities, and where they can grow our economy, but also shape our society. And when you think of it in those terms, the Minderoo Foundation's Thrive by 5 agenda, with its big vision and many voices, becomes quite a compelling proposition. This is an agenda that I've been fortunate enough to be on the edges of for the past 15 years. And I'd have to say it's an agenda where we have made significant progress, particularly in relation to almost universal access to the year before school. But we also know that there's an awful lot more to be done. The reality is that more than 1 in 10 children are developmentally vulnerable on 2 or more of the 5 domains that we measure through the Australian Early Development Census. And it's a figure that we fear might rise in next year's census update, given the year we've just had. So the Thrive by 5 campaign provides all of us in this debate and in the early childhood discussion right across the country with an opportunity at this time to not only take stock, but also to lift our sights. And it's in this spirit of lifting our sights that we'll focus today's discussion. To help us, we have a stellar panel that I'll return to in just a moment to introduce. But just a few housekeeping points to start with. As the Chancellor mentioned, we are recording this session to be uploaded online later, so please be respectful and not say anything that you wouldn't be happy to say in a public forum. Today's event is being run, of course, in partnership with Thrive by 5 and the Minderoo Foundation. This is a national campaign calling for universally accessible and high quality early learning and care, and you can find out more and join the campaign at thriveby5.org.au. There is a chat function that we would ask you to take advantage of. Please use it to ask questions or make comments or engage in the conversation. We would encourage you to jump right into the chat now, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from. Your participation both in the session and in the chat makes for a more engaging session. We encourage you to use your full names and include the organisation you're coming from. If you have any technical issues at all, please just message tech support in the chat and Jane and the team will be able to help you out. The format of today's conversation will be as follows. We'll commence with some short talks from Dr. Forrest and Professors Cornish and Flair that will give you a flavour of the ambition of Thrive by 5 and also outline how some of our best Monash researchers are thinking about this issue. We'll then bring the speakers together in a panel arrangement, at which point we'll also bring in Professor Michael Mitcham, and we'll talk about the range of issues that affect policy and systems change in early childhood. For time's sake, I won't repeat the biographies of our speakers that the Chancellor has just gone through. We really want to spend as much time as possible today engaging you in a lively conversation, get as many of your questions as possible, and we will all going to plan throw to a few of you to give you a chance to ask questions directly. So keep those questions coming via the chat. Please try to be succinct as you can in your comments, and ideally comments rather than questions rather than statements. To begin with, I'd like to invite some opening remarks and comments from Nicola Forrest, the co-founder and co-chair of Minderoo Foundation. And just as I do, can I start off, Nicola, just by congratulating you and Minderoo for the leadership that you're showing in this space. It's clearly quite a remarkable role, leadership role for philanthropy to play in what we all share as an understanding to be a really important issue for the future of the country. So I'd invite you to make some opening remarks, Nicola. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rod. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm speaking from the Whadjuk Noongar traditional lands. I'm in Perth, and I'm delighted to be here to join this first panel of 3 that Minderoo Foundation is doing along with the Monash University. I believe it's a great collaboration. Can I just first acknowledge you, Rod, our Professor Rod Glover, our facilitator for today, Chancellor Simon McEwen, thank you very much for your introductions, and my fellow panelists. I'm really looking forward to hearing more of what you've got to say. We at Minderoo Foundation believe every child can and should thrive by the age of 5. Happy and healthy children are the cornerstone of a cohesive society, a strong economy, and a prosperous Australia. It is imperative then that every Australian child, regardless of where they grow up or who their parents are, is given the best chance to reach his or her potential. Sadly, this is not the reality, with 1 in 5 Aussie kids starting primary school not ready to learn. Rod, you said 1 in 10, I say it's 1 in 5. This alarming reality has led Minderoo Foundation to spearhead a new grassroots campaign, Thrive by 5. It's designed to bring researchers, families, educators, and concerned citizens in a movement for systems change in early childhood. The time for action is now. As part of the campaign, we are calling for a high-quality early learning system, a system that is more accessible, will enhance brain development for kids, increase parental engagement in employment, and reduce government spending down the track on late intervention. Just a little bit of a background of how Minderoo arrived here. It was a passion for improving early childhood outcomes that led Andrew and I to establish the Australian Children's Trust in 2001. It's the precursor to the Minderoo Foundation. We were guided by the principle that if you want to help society or a community, you must invest in children and you must look after your most disadvantaged. Over the years, my commitment to ensuring every child has the best chance to reach their potential has only grown stronger. Wherever possible, I have used my position to advocate for early brain development. Some of the things that we have done, including last year, we've launched the 2019 Cost of Late Intervention report, which shined a light on the billions of taxpayers' dollars funneled into problems linked back to gaps in the early childhood system. The report showed that every year, Australian taxpayers are paying more than $15 billion a year in late intervention. Minderoo Foundation is evidence-driven and a champion for collaboration. We believe in quality research, utilising scientific evidence and economic modelling conducted by credible organisations. Rather than rest on our laurels, we are seeking more to be done to improve Australia's system of early learning. We need to sharpen the national conversation when it comes to our children, to help build momentum for a shift in policy thinking to ensure every Australian child has the chance to thrive. Our Thrive by 5 campaign calls for high quality early learning to be universally accessible. We want to unlock the substantial resources required to address those costs of late intervention. Imagine investing early. We want to give parents the information they need to support their children's brain development. And we want practitioners in early learning centres to connect parents with the latest research. I believe investing into an accessible childcare and early learning system will return a triple dividend. It will improve early learning outcomes for all Australian children. It will increase workforce participation of women. And it will also have a very long-term productivity gain by contributing to a more skilled workforce. Modelling has been produced by the Grattan Institute, Chief Executive Women, and the Australia Institute, demonstrating that more affordable, high-quality early learning yields economic benefits that more than justify their budgetary investment. So in conclusion, the time is for now. At Minderoo Foundation, we will fight for children's development. We are resolved to see our campaign all the way through, to see the reforms approved and applied. Join us in this campaign and help us raise a compelling, collective voice for change. I look forward to discussing how we can create a better early learning system for Australia with you and engaging in further discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nicola. And again, your leadership and that of Minderoo in this area has truly been outstanding. And I'd also like to acknowledge the leadership of Jay Weatherall in this as well, both in terms of the scale of the vision of the foundation, but the work that's already underway across the country in building the momentum of change is really setting us up well for where we need to get to in this debate. So thank you again.
Thank you.
I'd now like to introduce Professor Kim Cornish, my good friend and colleague, Director of the Turner Institute for Brain and Mental Health, to talk about her research. Over to you, Kim.
Thanks, Rod, and thank you also, Nicola, for the opportunity to really talk about how we can make a difference in the world now, and to the organisers for making this event happen. Developing and protecting the cognitive and mental health of our nation is a fundamental priority for all of us, but lately it hasn't been easy. 2020 wasted no time in delivering hits to our collective well-being. First, we watched as bushfires had ravaged our communities, their land, livelihoods and homes. And then within weeks, a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic would tear at the very fabric of our communities, our children's education, their psychological well-being and their potential to thrive. Ultimately, we have seen, and we will continue to see, the most vulnerable communities become even more vulnerable in 2021 and beyond. But instead of dismay, my message today is that instead of dismay at the task ahead, what if 2020 has provided an unprecedented opportunity to place a new adaptive lens on our nation's early education landscape within all of our communities, especially for our youngest populations? So where do we start first on this? We can look at the scientific evidence, and there is plenty. Decades of research have demonstrated that children who are cognitively and mentally healthy from newborn to 5 have the best opportunity to thrive, both academically and socially. We know that mentally healthy children as young as 3 years of age are more proficient early learners, more resilient to change, and more socially connected. In contrast, children who are especially vulnerable to developing poor mental health are at substantive risk of poor academic outcomes and psychological disorders such as anxiety, depression, and self-harm that further escalate and left unchecked can grow into the later childhood and teenage years into substance abuse, impulsive behaviours, and school delinquency and dropout, and then post-secondary reduced occupational opportunities. So disadvantage increases the risk of children skipping through the cracks. And 2020 hit our most vulnerable communities hard, the under 5s. And within those, children in remote regions and in culturally and linguistically diverse communities, children with a developmental brain disability such as autism, and children living in poverty. Without early interventions in all of these groups now, there will be social, community and economic aftershocks for years to come. No question of it. And as Nicola stated just a moment ago in her address, we know how late intervention already costs us a staggering 15 billion each year as a nation. But if we do nothing now after the pandemic, what will it be like in 5 years? For me, COVID-19 is a tipping point. But instead of seeing despair, let's not. Instead, let's see it as an unprecedented opportunity for a paradigm shift towards serious early intervention that is evidence-based. Never before in our history have we known so much about the developing brain across all of its levels, the genetic level, the environmental level, the cognitive and social levels. So at this critical juncture, there needs to be a long-term investment and coordinated strategy to effectively translate this knowledge into impact. And the time is now, because knowledge, we have new knowledge, we have great research, we've done that. We need now to translate it, not to do more and more research, but to translate what we have and to do so with some urgency. Ultimately, we need a new national movement whose mission is crystal clear: to make every child a resilient child, no matter their circumstances or where they live. But where do we start in this task, in this vision? 1, we need to embrace and invest in novel, adaptable, digital interactive technologies that can build resilience, cognitive and social, that are adaptable and inclusive to all and available to all. Australia is grounded in its diverse communities with different histories, distinct challenge and often unique educational needs. We now have the capacity to tailor digital programs and resources to meet these diverse needs and to reach all irrespective of cost. and we can do it now. 2, we need to co-create our digital resilience tools with educators, children, families, and their communities, so that they are personalised and target specific cognitive and social challenges. We no longer have to accept a one-size-fits-all approach as the only approach. 3rd, as a nation, we need to come together. We need to be more innovative and embrace technologies like telehealth that empower families. Instead of waiting for parents to reach out to services, and let's face it, the vast majority do not, let's bring the system to them. Like it or not, digital disruption is coming to early education. It's done so for transport, for accommodation, food deliveries. Now is the time for researchers like myself, neuroscientists, industry, philanthropists, and policymakers to get ahead of the curve. We have all the expertise at our fingertips in Australia. Australia is already a leader in digital scaling of cognitive and mental health tools for children and parents. The unique capabilities of the Turner Institute, for example, in developmental clinical psychology, in data science, in AI, in early childhood education, can make this critical vision of training cognitive resilience in even younger children a reality. In my own team, and I've been working in this field of early childhood development for just under 30 years, in my own team, we have pioneered digital interactive cognitive training programs that strengthen fundamental skills such as attention, inhibitory control, and working memory in very young children and across different populations. And I think if I can just describe what my perception is after all these years of change, I have seen now the world move with the potential to translate science and evidence into tools that can be delivered to all. So on slide 1, which should be with you now, on this slide, you can see 3 examples of how my team at the Turner have developed interactive games that strengthen cognitive resilience, such as attention and focus. And alongside these, I've gone through decades of where we started off with a laptop or a mainframe computer. We then over the years went into these portable laptops, which were a nightmare with families. And then we then got into iPads, and now we're in all this incredible technology. This is why there's no hold bars here, because we have the technology to do this. In my case here, you'll see that we have 3 types of tasks, and this has been done in conjunction with Taurus Games, who have been incredibly innovative in helping us use the technology of game development that we just were not experts in. They have taken, our ideas and created these incredible images you see in front of us. So each of our 3 games there, you see the tally game, which is at the top left, which is helping very young children with autism and other developmental disorders attend and focus in the classroom. You'll see 4 tally characters. Children can interact with them and choose them. And then we situated this task into games in that children, in scenarios that children would love, like a fish tank where they're fishing for different types of fish. They're on a treasure island in another. And we wanted to use tasks that would be adaptive, and children can use them again and again. They're not going to feel any failure. They just get reward after reward. But we're training them cognitively to focus more in the classroom. And as you'll see on all 3, they're all evidence-based. They've gone through the gold standard of a randomized control trial. In the Alfie game to your far right, we've used virtual reality in this case, where we're asking children to go into a scenario of a dragon in a game, and this is for older children with ADHD, to try and strengthen that inhibitory control that children often really struggle with. And when you start to struggle with that at the age of 3 and 4 as well, it kind of like escalates along those childhood years, and it makes a lot of learning and social relationships very difficult. So strengthening that. And in the pillar project to the left, bottom left, we have a project that is for again, developing early cognitive and what are called executive skills in vulnerable young children from rural and remote regions in Victoria. And for this, we have worked with some of our elders here at Monash to develop our programme so it does actually fit within the Indigenous community. And this is the beauty of this type of technology now. You can develop it for your populations. There's no need for a white middle class game that everybody does at all. So we can, working hand in hand with the communities, with teachers, all of the games you see there have been developed with children, with teachers at the very start to check they loved the visuals and that they were happy with the storyline. And then we worked with our research team to make all of this happen. And again, also with tourist games. And more than anything, they can be personalized to different communities and age groups, and they work. We know they work because the evidence base of a randomized controlled trial tells us they work. And more than that, children love them. So my final part of my message here is, so let 2020 be the year that catapulted the biggest and most sustainable change for the health of our children. We must come together as researchers, educators in early childhood, clinicians and disability and child protection specialists under a national movement that reaches all across Australia to translate our research knowledge into groundbreaking practice. But none of us can do it alone. But through unprecedented collaborative research and practice efforts, let 2020 be a call to arms to change the early education landscape for good. Let's ensure that every Australian child is a resilient child, and let that change begin now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. I always love hearing from Kim, as on the one hand, she never holds back on calling out the scale of the opportunity of the moment and doing so with ambition. And rare amongst those who call out such ambition, she every day practices what she preaches in her own work. So thank you, Kim. I will note an interesting comment in the chat that I'll come back to in the panel discussion from Nick Hopwood, which is challenging the resilience discourse and the risk of that getting into deficits thinking. But partly, I think, addressing that, and in a similar spirit to Kim of talking about research with impact, I'd now like to invite Marilyn Flower, Laureate Fellow, to talk to us about the Conceptual Play Lab. And Marilyn's work, of course, is based in my hometown, sunny Frankston. So over to you, Marilyn. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and to Nicola and to my fellow colleagues. I'm speaking from Bunurong country, and COVID, as Kim has already introduced, has changed the world for children. Children are hearing and experiencing mask wearing, physical distancing, and so on. They have to imagine a virus they can't actually see. So now the importance of imagination in play and children's imagination of STEM concepts such as science, technology, engineering, and mathematics has become increasingly important for those children, so they don't feel isolated, marginalised, and not know what's going on in the world. But, and there's always a but, when it comes to STEM, research suggests that educators lack confidence and girls are pushed aside. And yet we know from research from all over the world that investing in girls and women is important. We've developed an evidence-based model, as Kim has as well, that tackles this issue and other issues. The Monash Conceptual Play Lab, which is funded through the Australian Research Council, is a peer-reviewed national program of research. And we're looking at the way in which imagination in play and imagination in STEM interact in early childhood. We're working with educators, so like Kim and like Nicola has talked about at the beginning, these collaborations are really important, and we're offering professional development for system change. And this is to deliver our evidence-based model called Conceptual Play World. And next year we begin rolling out to 3,000 early childhood educators this model and more. And this is really important for us as part of capacity building and system change. Change starts at home, as we all know. So we're also developing resources for families to become play partners with children. And we have, for those of you who may be interested to jump onto our website, we have a host of free resources, not just our professional development, but we have pop-up play world starters, and we have virtual reality and augmented reality apps in the making with our partnership with the Faculty of Engineering. So this is a really important collaboration between education and engineering. But also we have an app that we've developed that that you can just download free of charge, regardless of what platform. And it gives educators the capacity to video record imagination in play and imagination in STEM, as well as access fabulous tools and resources to support these new practices that are available and show you what a conceptual play world looks like in practice in an early childhood setting, but also in family homes. And as part of the research that we're taking forward, our team in the Conceptual Play Lab, and we're going to show you some examples of that right at the end of this presentation, our team is working hard to build other types of resources. So we have support for educators in a closed Facebook. We're developing one for families so that people can just pop on and ask questions, can share their practices with each other, and so on. But important for us is to, as part of system change and capacity building in this area, is also better understanding what this means for children as they form concepts from infancy, toddlerhood, preschoolers and into school. And so we're following children as part of our research so that we can understand this better. So in our play lab over the next 5 years, we're looking at the impact of our conceptual play world model. We know that there is at least a minimum of 12,000 service providers who are delivering programs to 3 and 6-year-old children. But of course, we focus on infants and toddlers as well, where there is not a lot of research done in this area for STEM. And we need to reach out to them. But to amplify this research, we also need longitudinal data to track the impact that play has for concept formation beyond early childhood. Because we already know that play has a powerful impact on children's life chances later in life. We also need data on how best to build the next generation of imaginative and creative thinkers and innovators, because we don't know what is around the corner. We don't know, we can't even imagine some of the kinds of things these young children will be experiencing in the future and will need to deal with, but also what career paths are ahead of them, careers that have not yet even been invented. The Play Lab is working together with educators and families to build evidence of play and learning, promoting a strong voice and a strong vision for play, for all of the reasons that Nicola mentioned, but also Kim mentioned as well. It is with evidence and a program to implement it that we can build systemic and long-lasting change. So we're reaching out and saying, become involved, be part of the change agents of the future for these children and families. And we're going to show you now a short video of just a little snapshot of some of the free material that we're making available. And you'll get to meet some of our storytellers in this video.
Do you want to foster scientific curiosity, develop mathematical logic, and instill design and engineering thinking in children? The Conceptual Play World is a play-based model that can help you do this. It's based on some of the world's best research and inspires young children to form concepts in STEM, especially girls. We want to support you in pioneering play worlds in your preschool, family daycare, school, or childcare centre. You can opt for a 2-hour interactive online session with Laureate Professor Marilyn Flair and her team from the Conceptual Play Lab at Monash University. The session will be tailored to you and your needs. All you need to do is bring along your favourite children's book, stories you and your children will love.
What happened here? A fox is trying to catch the chicken.
Or if you prefer self-paced learning, there's an option to work through our modules online. They're packed with videos, prompts, and resources to support you. And because it's all online, you can do our workshop or online training from anywhere in Australia or around the world. Contact the Conceptual Play Lab to sign up for your personalised professional development. The Conceptual Play World, where imagination in STEM meets imagination in play.
Thank you, Marilyn. And once again, it's a great example of research at its very best, research that's applied in practice, that has real world impact, that draws on the latest in technology, but also research that, interestingly, and this is a point that's come up in a couple of the chat questions as well, research that uses digital technologies to think about how our policies and systems might accommodate a range of different personal and community contexts. And I think that's something we'll come back to in the conversation. At this point, I'll invite the panel to come back together, if you will. So in the next little while, I'll ask some questions of Nicola Forrest, Kim Cornish, Marilyn Flower, and I'll welcome in at this stage Professor Michael Mintram. And Michael, I might open with you, and reflecting on what Kim and Marilyn have just described, what does it say about how we might have to think differently about policy and systems change?
Thanks very much, Rod. Before I answer your question, I would also like to acknowledge that I'm speaking today from the land that was the traditional owners are the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And it does seem to me that part of paying respects is always to sort of say, what can any of us do to make the world a better place, to create opportunities for those who are coming after us. And in this conversation of early childhood education, it's a great opportunity, I think, to explore that. And I think that the discussion to this point has helped us to think a little bit about what an amazing future for Australia would look like if we could deliver really high quality early childhood education to all young children and help them in their journey through life. And so when I think, and this really is segueing into your question, Rod, the comments that Kim and Marilyn have made about their research really, I think, reminds us that there are in fact some incredible bright spots out there in the broader kind of context of early childhood education in Australia today. And so I think a challenge for policymaking is to identify all of those bright spots and say, how can we really learn from those, really leverage from them so that we develop a system that works really well for everyone. Now, Rod, I'm also cognizant of the question or the point that you made early on when you said you're facilitating, that you were going to ask the people on the chat to raise questions rather than make statements. So I thought that I might just suggest some questions here in my comments. And that is because, you know, as someone with a policy background and who's thought quite a lot about early childhood education, I led a task force on early childhood education in New Zealand about 10 years ago. And we were developing an agenda for amazing children. And so my questions really do have been influenced to some degree by that work that I did at that time. But it seems to me the first thing that when we're designing policy in this area, we need to ask is, how can we effectively bring in those who are most vulnerable, bring them into the system? Because we know from the evidence that in fact, those who stand to gain most are actually those who are hardest to reach often in the system. So what can we do? What policies could we put in place that would increase the availability of high quality early childhood education to those who most need it, who are most vulnerable, who are often so distant and almost disconnected from the everyday systems that everyone else, most other people understand and know. Second thing I'd say is, how do we ensure that the early childhood education services that are provided are actually catering effectively to that diversity of needs that are out there? So it's not just one thing to bring everyone into the system, but actually bring them in and then do what we can so that those people can develop to be the very best that they're capable of. And so I think we need to think quite hard there about the different kind of backgrounds and heritages resources that people come to early childhood education with, and not necessarily think of that in sort of in deficit terms either, but actually to say how can we use those diversity of backgrounds really effectively, that all of us can learn from that too. So I think that there's a question there. So it's a policy question. But it does suggest to me that the landscape of early childhood education, high quality early childhood education, will always be quite variegated. And I think that's a very interesting thing for policymakers to consider, because in the history of policymaking, we've often focused on trying to have one size fits all kind of approaches and get everyone to fit into that. And I don't think that that's the way we want to move forward here. And the third question, which kind of arises from that, I think, is how do you build a system that continually learns from the successes in it and keeps building, keeps innovating? And I think that that's, again, something that we, in policy work, in most countries, have not actually tackled particularly well. That sometimes systems have been put in place and they've been pretty good, but we haven't necessarily known how to keep them at the cutting edge and keep growing. And that, of course, is where the research that Marilyn and Kim have talked about today becomes critically important. That, you know, I think that's part of the solution. It's not the only part of the solution, but it's a big part of it, is to actually always be inquiry-driven, research-driven, and thinking about how policy can continuously improve and be delivering, in the end, the highest quality for young people. Why do we want that? We've got a great possibility in Australia to build an amazing multicultural society, you know, one that is undoubtedly works in every possible way. And I think we have to start with early childhood education and the kind of questions that I've raised there today.
Great, thank you, Michael. And interesting in that sort of idea of how do we keep on innovating and learning in the system. And one of the features, I think, of Kim and Marilyn's research that's worth calling out is the way in which the research is co-evolving with the practice. So the research is evolving with the communities that are affected by it, working with the workforce, working with the systems they're operating in. And I think that offers a fair clue as how do we keep on learning. We're going to take a question from the floor from Hilary Monk.
Hello, I'm sorry, I was just trying to unmute and was having a problem there. I'm really fascinated by what we've been talking about and very, very excited about seeing so many innovative ideas. And I guess one of my questions is related to digital tools and just how do we make them available to all communities? And is it possible that some children, if we're focusing on digital technologies and digital tools, would actually miss out? And so, you know, this kind of brings in some of the ideas about policy, how are opportunities available for children and families to have access to some of these things. But also it brings about some thinking around, you know, we're developing fantastic ideas, but how community orientated are they? And do they actually bring an opportunity for all children, or is it just some children?
Okay, I can answer that.
Thank you, Kim.
That's all right. We are just beginning in this journey. Okay, digital technologies are now beginning to be a gateway, but they are not a replacement on education. They're not a replacement on the curriculum. So the games that I spoke about today are the tools, are based on cognitive science principles that we have, well, have been investigated for over a century, but they are tools that are designed to tap various early learning essential cognitive skills like attention, like, you know, inhibition, and trying to get children concentrating in classrooms when they come in with a vulnerability. Nicola was absolutely correct. In Australia, around about 11,500 or so children every year start school with a cognitive incapacity. So they start school normally with vulnerable attention, making them vulnerable all the way through. So the digital technologies now, when they are delivered within communities, and we're talking about those programs that can be delivered, we've done the research, they are not They are not expensive to do. And when they're delivered by communities, with their teachers, with the parents, with the children themselves, there is a massive investment in there. So I'm not saying children won't miss out, but what I am saying is that if your child, on the whole, you know, most access to services currently when it comes to either education or clinical requires almost like a middle-class family with a mobile phoning up their GP for a referral. You know, there's 90% out there don't do that. And this is, you know, a moment to actually deliver programs that will train the brain, that early malleable brain, into, you know, stronger than ever.
Can I just add to that? I think we're living on this precipice of amazing technology and the opportunity to use these digital tools to enhance the work that everyone is doing. But let's not forget that in those first few years, the most important thing for these children is actually the personal interaction and the human touch. And that's where most of these neural pathways are made. So digital is brilliant. And we've also developed an app, and it's free for people to download, called Bright Tomorrows, which just gives tips to parents and has the brainy background and the research at the back of it. So people kind of realize all those sort of things that you have automatically done if you've been parented that way, like peekaboo, or all the reasons why we do these things to help build resilience in children. But I think what we're talking about here is the whole system. And in those first few years, I think part of the big issue, going back to what you said, Michael, is that it is fragmented and it is disjointed, and there actually isn't a system. So we have a good maternal system here in Australia where children are born and brought into the world very healthily. And then we have like an early kindergarten, year 4 years of age, they enter into sort of formal education. And so many children fall through the cracks in 4 years. And that's really the area that we're talking about here, I think. And digital is important, but it's only makes part of it.
And I'll just add to it as well. I totally agree with everything that's been said. One of the interesting projects, research projects that I was involved in some time back, was actually in very hard to reach communities. And one of the interesting things I found was that actually sometimes there might not be all the food in the fridge or a bowl of fruit on top of the fridge, or even papers and pencils, but mostly the families had a mobile phone, and they really drew on that mobile phone for a whole range of things. So if we know that this is available to some families that are hard to reach, then having the kind of apps that are engaging and exciting and support families to be, you know, for families to play and parents to be play partners with their children in one way or another, and all the other things around executive function that Kim was talking about and brain development, this has got to be a possible way for us to be at the dinner table or the dinner room, because it might not be a table, to support these families. So I think digital tools are not the panacea, but boy, they can be useful when you know that they're available.
Thanks, Marilyn, and thank you, Hilary, for your question. Our next question is from Nick Hopwood.
Hi, thank you. I've enjoyed this tremendously, and I noticed that Rachel and Catherine and Marie and some others responded. So Kim, I was particularly taken when you're speaking about kind of hoping that more children would be more resilient, and in a sense I agree. But actually the future for Australia that I care about is not the one where more children are resilient. It's the future where children don't need to be resilient in the first place. And so there are two problems that I see with that discourse of resilience. One is that it gives people an excuse to leave the world in a problematic way, and the responsibility lies on children to be resilient. The other one is, of course, we still need the idea of resilience, but it's been taken up in so many problematic ways. In the UK, ex-army people go into schools and teach teenagers to be gritty. And it's kind of, so how can we work with it not in that way, where it's usually white middle class people telling other people they don't have enough resilience, when actually the people they're talking about probably have way more than they do. But also, how do we not let resilience form our horizon? Because I think it is the wrong horizon. If we're going to be really lofty with our ambitions, resilience is not where we should be looking.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you on that one. Resilience, resilience is whatever we call it, whether we call it healthy brains, strong cognitive architecture, is critical, right? It is critical. And the pandemic and what's happened this last year has meant vulnerable communities are even more vulnerable. Can you imagine if you are in a family that both parents have lost their jobs? You know, you're 4 years old, you've just started in preschool, you're coming out to preschool, things are awful at home. You know, we know that when children are less distractible, more focused, more concentrated, they can actually really build themselves up in terms of better mental health. And importantly, Nick, is that when we are seeing more and more children 5 and above self-harming, depression, anxiety, really, really worrying at almost like an adult level, you know, and we know the research tells us that if they have strong cognitive architecture, so we'll move away from the word resilient, the word is unimportant. It's the fact that they have strong early cognitive architecture, are they able to then be able to get that self-control they need to just move and accept change. And that's what I want. I want children to come in back to school next year and be, you know, have good cognitive architecture, good resilience, you know, and their well-being good. For me, their well-being is more important than anything. So that's my response to your question. If the name is unimportant, and I'm a martial artist, so we're always talking about self resilience and all of that. Tell me, I know what you mean on that. But to me, it just means good cognitive architecture as children start school.
Yeah, and I think you can call it social and emotional well-being.
Yeah.
One of the frightening things that came out in the report that we did last year on the cost of late intervention was the number of hospitalisations of children up to the age of 20 with mental health issues. It's been the biggest increase in any sort of medical situation with kids. And I think that speaks exactly to not just the cognitive control, but the social and emotional well-being. And most of that is formed in those first few years. And it's not to say the brain hasn't got the elasticity. You're not written off then if you haven't got it all, but it certainly helps the strong building blocks to come.
Yeah, I do think that a big part of this is about language, and that conversation takes me back to a bit over a decade ago when we were debating the language around what was termed the Melbourne Declaration and what we'd want our school students to be able to achieve. And that debate, at that time, some people were talking resilience and others were talking confident, creative and capable learners. But it was actually a more common view, or a more of a shared view than maybe the language suggested, in that it was all about the set of capabilities to survive and to thrive. So I do think we can get caught up a bit sometimes on the language, but it does raise, I think, a really interesting point about the need, I guess, for cut through on the vision here and the language around the vision as well. Michael, I might throw back to you at this point. The issue that's come up in part of the discussion around what this agenda looks like for people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, what it looks like for Indigenous children, what it looks like for people in rural settings. How can we be thinking about this agenda of policy change in a way that is not just a universal system as a uniform system, but a universal system that attends to everyone's needs? How do we need to be thinking differently to achieve that?
Thanks, Rod. I think a really important thing here is to for policy designers to really spend time listening to people in different communities and really understanding their experiences and what they value, the strengths they have, the challenges, the aspirations they have. Thinking about the case of New Zealand, in the 1970s, they set up kahanga reo, language nests for Maori. And, it was relatively controversial at the time, but that has led to a massive renaissance in the Maori language in New Zealand, but not just language, but culture as well, and great pride. And I think that it's a long-term project, but to me, that I think has been an incredible thing. And so when we were thinking about early childhood education in New Zealand, we were always thinking about, the bicultural nature of the country, but also what's interesting is how the language nest model was then used for Pacific Island children in New Zealand as well. So I think that that's a big part of it. You have to actually go in there and really work with those communities. And this is, by the way, takes policy designers out of their comfort zone often. But this is how you make good policy, right? Because if policy made in capital cities doesn't work in those communities, then the policy doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It doesn't matter how glossy the cover of it is, it doesn't work, you know. But on the other hand, if we can actually go out there and do that, then there's such a great learning opportunity for everyone, right? Because you could learn something in particular communities that could actually be a solution to a problem in other communities as well. And this is what I sort of mean about having the variegated landscape can actually be a huge kind of resource or advantage for us. We don't necessarily have to look at it and say, oh my goodness, it's such a policy challenge. It's actually, it's an exciting policy conundrum that we can all learn from.
And Michael, I want to add something there, because I actually think we already have quite a lot of research here in Australia, because the Minderoo Foundation has been funding a school here in Western Australia called Chalice Primary School, just out of Armidale, for the last 8 years. And the evidence that we took from what was happening there around a holistic approach to children and families, actually I took to Canberra to Scott Morrison when he was Minister for Social Services, and they launched Connected Beginnings on the back of that evidence. And that's been running for 5 years in about 10 different communities across Australia with a research partner. And recently, and now the Stronger Places, Stronger People is another group of 10 communities across Australia. The government keeps rolling out sort of programs saying they're a pilot. And I guess I'm at the point where I've been kind of funding these pilots for more than 10 years. And I know that we've got enough evidence, and I can't wait to get in a room with you and some other policymakers. I know it's really complicated, and it has to be an iterative process, which is what Kim and Marilyn's work is, and the development. Each community has its own special flavour, and of course that has to be taken into an account.
Yeah, I think, Nicola, you're absolutely right, because it's about scaling it up. You know, we have the research, we have the ongoing research to continue to inform us, but it needs to be scaled up, and that's where policy really matters, and that's when you get system change. So, you know, I absolutely think it's amazing what is actually being trying to be done here. So thank you, Nicola, and thank you to my colleagues as well, because it's, for this to happen is just going to be a game changer. We do have to do something. We just can't sit back anymore. And New Zealand's given us some really good hints. So I agree with Michael, and particularly because they've invested and had policies which was around pay parity for early childhood educators, and as well as recognising that the quality of the workforce is all based on the quality and education of the workforce. And so you need legislation which says, actually, we need degree qualified leaders in our early childhood services, along with teams of people to take forward this agenda. So it's got to happen at all levels, but it needs policy to make it, policy change to make it at least begin.
Thank you, Marilyn. And I'm really glad that you got the opportunity to mention what a number of comments in the chat have raised, and which I think we would all agree on in terms of just the importance of the workforce and a quality and well remunerated workforce as any part of an agenda like this. My dog Bert in the background also agrees with us. Conscious of time, I will wrap up now. I hope that everyone has got a sense of the scale and the nature of the ambition, the initiatives, but also the challenge we've got in this area. This is the first of what will be 3 virtual town halls that we have planned. But for now, I'd just like to say thank you firstly to the Chancellor, Simon McKeon, for introducing the session, to our panelists, Nicola Forrest, Kim Cornish, Marilyn Flair, and Michael Mintram. And if I could also thank the Thrive by 5, the Essential Media, and the Monash team in the background that has put this event together. The Thrive by 5 campaign and the call for universally accessible and high quality early learning and care will obviously continue around the country. It's an agenda that would be great to get you to sign up to if you haven't already. You can join by visiting thriveby5.org.au. And finally, can I just wrap by thanking each and every one of you for giving of your time today. This is a great agenda that we're all quite inspired about, but it's also an agenda that I think we all appreciate is only going to actually get up if there's a powerful sort of movement for change that gets behind it. So we would really encourage everyone to get behind Thrive by 5, get behind the campaign, and we look forward to seeing you next time at the next town hall. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done, everyone.